I want you to start by taking a slow, deep breath. Really, just settle in. Because I want you to consider a genuinely strange, almost unsettling possibility about your own mind. We go through our days making choices: what we're going to eat, who we're going to date, where we're going to travel. And we do all of this under this grand assumption that we are actively trying to maximize our happiness. We assume, quite naturally, that we want a good, joyful, positive lived experience. But what if that is entirely false? What if humanity's ultimate pursuit isn't actual lived happiness at all? What if instead the primary driving force of your entire life is simply the pursuit of a compelling narrative? Well, let's dive into this explainer. Because the psychological reality of how you value your life, how you actually keep score, is far darker and honestly far more paradoxical than you might think. To really understand this paradox, we have to directly confront a completely baffling psychological mystery. Think about it. If we are rational creatures, right? Creatures who logically desire comfort and happiness, why do we constantly and willingly choose unnecessary pain? And to be clear, I don't mean this in some poetic, abstract, or metaphorical sense. I mean actual, physical, measurable discomfort. Why would a human being in a completely controlled environment look at two painful options, accurately perceive both of them, and purposefully select the one that causes more total agony? It sounds like a bad joke. It sounds impossible. But this is the central mystery we are going to deeply unpack today, drawing on the groundbreaking research of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. So according to Kahneman, you have to realize something fundamental. You are not a single, unified being when it comes to perceiving your life. You're just not. You actually have a civil war raging inside your head right now between two distinct entities. First, there's what he calls the experiencing self. Now, this self lives entirely in the present moment. It's the part of you that registers pain, pleasure, warmth, and cold. It really only answers one simple, immediate question. Does it hurt right now? But then, sitting right next to it, there's the remembering self. This is the storyteller. It doesn't live in the present at all. Instead, it keeps score of the past, and it makes the decisions for your future. It's the one asking, how was it on the whole? I really want to let this philosophical weight sink in for a moment. Kahneman wrote something profound. He said, the experiencing self does not have a voice. Just think about the sheer tragedy of that statement for a second. The self that actually feels the sunshine on your skin. The self that actually suffers through the mind-numbing boredom of a terrible movie or feels the sharp physical pain of an injury. That self is completely silenced. It's gagged. When it comes time to evaluate an event or make a decision about what you're going to do next in your life, the dominant storyteller, your remembering self, steps up and completely hogs the microphone. It controls the narrative, completely and utterly overriding the actual physical reality of your lived moments. Section 1. The Cold Hand Experiment. So to actually test this civil war in our heads, Kahneman and his colleagues needed a way to examine the conflict between the experiencing self and the remembering self in a strict laboratory setting. They essentially needed a mild, safe form of torture to see which self would ultimately make the call. What they came up with was asking participants to submerge their hands in painfully cold ice water. Let's slowly map out exactly how this trial worked, because the sheer absurdity of human logic is going to become visually undeniable here. Participants were subjected to two different trials. In the first trial, they held their hand in painfully cold water for exactly 60 seconds. Then they took their hand out. Simple, right? Painful, but simple. Now, in the second trial, they did the exact same 60 seconds of painfully cold water, but instead of stopping at a minute, the trial continued for an extra 30 seconds. During this bonus 30 seconds, the temperature of the water was raised by just 1 single degree. So it was slightly warmer, yes, but still entirely painful. Just to recap, Trial 1, 60 seconds of pure pain. Trial 2, 90 seconds of total pain. After experiencing both of these trials, the researchers sat the participants down and asked them a very simple question. If you have to repeat one of these trials, which one will you choose? And the results of this question expose a terrifying glitch in human logic. A massive, staggering 80% of the participants who noticed the temperature change willingly chose to repeat the longer 90-second trial. The vast majority of people explicitly opted for the scenario that objectively caused them more total suffering. Let's just pause here. I want to reflect on the absolute tragedy of human logic that is happening right in front of us. People voluntarily subjected themselves to 30 extra seconds of needless, freezing agony. Think about that from the perspective of the experiencing self, the entity actually feeling the biting, freezing water on its skin. From that perspective, this choice is a catastrophe. It's madness. The 90-second trial is strictly worse in every conceivable way. It contains all the exact same pain of the 60-second trial, plus a bonus half-minute of suffering. There's no upside for the feeling body, yet they chose it anyway. So naturally, the absolute most crucial point here is why? Why on earth did they choose the worst experience? It's not like the participants were masochists. They didn't want to suffer. Let me assure you, if you asked them right in the middle of that extra 30 seconds, hey, do you want this to stop? They would have screamed yes. But here is the catch. The decision of which trial to repeat wasn't made by the experiencing self. It was made by the remembering self. And this exposes the fundamentally flawed, almost deceptive mechanics of how human memory actually operates. You see, the storyteller in your head does not evaluate pain the way a thermometer evaluates temperature. It has its own bizarre agenda. The remembering self doesn't keep a perfect, objective, second-by-second video recording of your life. It's not a security camera. Instead, it acts like a Hollywood editor. It rates a heavily edited movie script, and it directs that script using very specific cognitive rules. To understand why normal people chose an extra 30 seconds of pain, we have to look at the two unbending rules of the storyteller. They are called duration neglect and the peak end rule. These two psychological glitches govern exactly how your memory constructs the narrative of your entire existence. Let's start by unpacking the first glitch, duration neglect. This is the mind's built-in, evolutionary tendency to completely ignore how long an experience actually lasts. I mean, literally ignore it. To your remembering self, it makes zero difference whether the agonizing pain lasted 60 seconds, 90 seconds, or even 2 hours. The actual length of the episode is simply left on the cutting room floor. When the storyteller is sitting back and deciding how bad that ice water was, the entire variable of time is just thrown completely out the window. And that brings us to the second incredibly powerful glitch, the peak end rule. Think about it. If the storyteller completely ignores duration, what does it actually care about? Well, it turns out it only cares about two specific snapshots, the peak of the intensity and the very end of the experience, the final frame of the movie. Now, suddenly that insane cold hand choice makes terrifying perfect sense. The 90-second trial won simply because it ended on a slightly warmer note. The pain decreased right at the end. It created a better ending for the storyteller. The remembering self looked back at the 60-second trial and said, wow, that ended brutally. Then it looked at the 90-second trial and said, hey, that was actually getting a little better right at the end. It completely, willfully ignored the fact that the second option contained vastly more total pain. It just liked the finale better. Kahneman uses this beautifully tragic metaphor to describe how this works in our daily lives. Imagine you're sitting in a concert hall, listening to a record of a glorious, breathtaking symphony. For 59 minutes, you are sitting there in absolute musical ecstasy. Your experiencing self is just in heaven. But then, at the very end of the record, there was a dreadful, ear-piercing screeching sound. When people describe this exact scenario, they almost always say, oh, that screeching sound ruined the whole experience. But Kahneman points out that this is a complete cognitive illusion. It literally didn't ruin the experience. You already had 59 minutes of total joy. That is an undeniable fact. What the screech ruined wasn't the experience. It ruined the memory of the experience. This symphony metaphor is absolutely crucial because it exposes the profound misalignment at the core of human life. In the realm of behavioral economics, this is known as the gap between decision utility and experienced utility. What your remembering self chooses is almost always completely disconnected from what your experiencing self actually feels. And because of this, we are constantly, day in and day out, making decisions that utterly fail to optimize our actual lived well-being. We choose vacations, we pick jobs, we even stay in relationships based on the cinematic memory they are going to leave behind in our heads, not on the moment-to-moment daily reality of actually living through them. Section 2, the tragedy of memory. Now, you might be thinking this is just a quirky trick played in a lab, but it's not. It is a profound, sprawling metaphor for the ultimate tragedy of the human condition. Think about how many times you have personally endured a genuinely miserable situation just because you knew it would make a great story later at a dinner party. Or think about how often you've been somewhere breathtaking, a beautiful sunset, a concert, and you pull out your phone to take a photograph, literally pulling yourself entirely out of the beautiful lived experience just so your remembering self could have a nice souvenir. Kahneman summarizes this tragedy with a razor-sharp observation. What we learn from the past is to maximize the qualities of our future memories, not necessarily of our future experience. We actively, willingly sacrifice our present happiness merely to ensure our future memories are aesthetically pleasing. We treat our own lived moments as entirely disposable, using them purely as raw material to feed the voracious appetite of that storyteller in our heads. But here is the stark, undeniable reality that we have to wake up to. Time is our ultimate finite resource. It's all we really have. While the remembering self completely neglects duration, our actual lived time is fleeting and it is incredibly precious. The hours, the minutes, the seconds, that is where your life actually happens. By allowing the remembering self to call the shots, we are systematically devaluing the only currency we truly possess, the present moment. We endure these long, agonizing stretches of mild misery just for a brief high peak or a slightly pleasant ending. It's a terrible trade. Section 3, Reclaiming Your Present Self. So what do we do about this? How do we actually unmask this psychological tyranny and recognize the built-in inconsistency of our own minds? Well, the first step to any kind of freedom is simply awareness. You have to realize that your memory is a biased editing machine. It is not telling you the whole truth. When you feel that urge to do something incredibly unpleasant just for the sake of the story, or when you let a single bad ending ruin what was otherwise a beautiful, relaxing vacation, you need to recognize that your remembering self has hijacked the control panel. You have to consciously, actively work to give a voice back to your lived experience. You have to bypass your internal storyteller. When you are eating a great meal or walking through a quiet park or just sitting on the couch with a friend, try to focus entirely on the duration of the experience. Defy the peak end rule. Validate the long, normal stretches of quiet, undramatic contentment that your memory will naturally try to delete because it's boring. Tell the storyteller to be quiet for a minute and just let your experiencing self feel the world. This is the tyranny of the remembering self. Kahneman's stark thesis here requires a massive paradigm shift in how we evaluate our own existence. We have to stop living our lives as if we are actors in a movie being filmed for an audience of one, our future selves. Because if we don't break free from this tyranny, we are going to continue to plunge our hands back into the freezing water, enduring needless pain over and over again, simply because it makes for a slightly better ending to a deeply flawed script. I really want to leave you with this deeply self-reflective question as we close this explainer out. As you go out into the world today and you inevitably face your next major life choice, whether that's a big career move, a relationship decision, or honestly just how you're going to spend your weekend, I want you to pause and ask yourself, which self is actually making this choice? Are you trying to maximize the actual lived joy of the moments you're about to step into? Or are you just trying to write a compelling script for later? Ultimately, it's a choice we all have to make. Do you want a better story, or do you want a better life?